Hi, I'm Kristen Ward, and welcome to Maquette Vallant's Summer of Stories. If you're a fan of the show, you can help keep the stories coming by becoming a patron at patreon.com/MV Story Dance. Support from patrons like you helps me upgrade my equipment, offer stipends to special guests, even pay myself for some of the 30 plus hours that go into each episode. In return, you get access to special behind-the-scenes footage, bonus videos, special downloads, and more. Tonight's story is based on the Turkish tale, The Fish-Peri, which I found in an old text entitled 44 Turkish Fairy Tales, viewable on sacredtexts.com. There are some really fantastic stories in there. I will post the link in the comments below. Many years ago, in a small cottage near the Mediterranean Sea, lived a fisherman with his wife and son Basim. Every day from sun-up to sunset, he went out to cast his nets. It was a hard living, and the fisherman wanted more for his son. And so he encouraged Basim to be anything he wanted to be. One day, as Basim was helping his mother broil fish and make bread for their supper, he decided that what he wanted most of all was to become a cook. He traveled all over the world, studying with the finest chefs from Paris to Pakistan, Tokyo to Trinidad. When his father died and his mother grew ill, the young man moved back into the cottage he grew up in and cooked for his mother as she had done for him. When his mother died, Basim used his modest savings to open a small cafe in town and stayed in the cottage. One day, as he was cleaning out the attic, he came upon one of his father's old fishing nets. He remembered the delicious fresh fish that his mother had cooked so many times and thought it would make a nice addition to the cafe's menu. The next day, he cast the net from sun-up to sundown and soon found that his father's work had indeed been very hard. He also found that despite his determination, he really was a lousy fisherman. At the end of the day, his toils only yielded 2 fish. One was small, barely enough for his dinner that night, and the other, though larger, had beautiful golden scales. Not daring to eat or throw it back, he carried it home in a bucket and threw it in the pond in his garden. He enjoyed a nice but meager fish dinner, then went to bed quite exhausted. The next morning, he got up early, made a nice bread for his dinner later, and then went into town to open the cafe, stopping briefly at his pond to admire the fish. "Good morning, beautiful fish," he greeted it, and he almost imagined that it winked at him. When he arrived home from work, he was surprised to find his cottage in subtle disarray. Well, his kitchen floor was wet, but there was no sign of a leak in the roof. A bit of his bread was missing, but a mouse would not have sliced it neatly and washed the knife and plate. There were footprints through the garden, and some of the roses had been picked and were floating in the pond. With a beautiful golden fish, the only possible witness, winked up at him. Basim went to work the next day still perplexed. One of his regular customers noticed that he seemed distracted, and upon hearing what had happened, offered to go to the cottage and check it out. He returned, smiling. "Why didn't you tell me you had a girlfriend? You could have just brought her around." Basim was now even more perplexed. "I don't know what you're talking about. Well, this town is only so big. Where would I have even met someone?" "I only know what I saw," said the patron. "Just as I was coming up to your house, a beautiful woman was coming up through the garden. Her long hair was dripping wet, as if she had just been for a swim. She went in the door to your kitchen, helped herself to a nice thick slice of your bread, and went back out through the garden, where she danced a while, picked herself a nice bouquet, and headed back towards the pond. By the time I could follow her there, she had disappeared. If you don't believe me, then let me open the cafe tomorrow so that you can stay home and see for yourself." The young man agreed and gave the man his key. When he returned home, sure enough, his kitchen floor was wet, some of his bread was missing, and there were footprints through the garden that were much smaller than the patron's big feet. And so, the next morning, the young man left his house, stopped at the pond to say, "Good morning, beautiful fish," and hid himself in the bushes. Not long after, he saw his golden fish leap from the water and shake itself, whereupon its skin fell off to reveal a lovely woman with long, wet hair. Without stopping to think, Basim leapt from the bushes where he was hiding, snatched up the fish's skin, and threw it into the water, where it sank to the bottom and dissolved into golden dust. "You should not have done that," the maiden said sadly. "But that which is done cannot be undone." Basim, being of good heart despite his hasty actions, gave her a spare room in the cottage, since she could no longer spend her evenings as a fish. At first, the woman stayed at the cottage and tended the garden by day, but after a while she got bored with it and decided to join Basim at the cafe, where she took orders and listened with joy to the stories of regulars and travelers alike. In return, she shared with them her own stories of the sea and her life as a fish, which the visitors took to be the most wonderful fairy tales. Pretty soon, the locals began to affectionately nickname her Fish, and each morning as he made their coffee, Basim would find himself still greeting, "Good morning, beautiful fish." News of the cafe's culinary delights and Fish's tales of wonder quickly spread, and one day the Sultan himself arrived at the cafe. He took one look at Fish, with her lovely long hair and marvelous stories, and decided that she should be his wife. When Basim stepped in on her behalf, the Sultan, being very old-fashioned, challenged the young chef, saying, "If in 40 days you can build me a palace of diamonds in the middle of the sea, then I shall let you have her." After the cafe closed that evening, Fish found Basim down by the pond, gazing sadly into the water. She said to him calmly, "Go down to the place where you caught me as a fish, and cast in a stone. My brother will appear. Tell him his sister requests a cushion. When he gives it to you, toss it into the sea where the Sultan wishes his palace built. Then come back to me." Basim followed her instructions, even though they seemed quite impossible. Sure enough, the next day a beautiful palace, even more wondrous than the Sultan had even imagined, emerged from the sea. But the Sultan was not letting go of Fish so easily. The next day he demanded that the young man prepare a feast that everyone in the land might eat their fill, and yet leftovers should remain. Again, Basim was dismayed. "You should learn to trust me," said Fish. "Now, go again, and this time ask my father for the coffee mill. But take care not to turn it on the way." Basim again followed her instructions, but on his way home he grew distracted and began to turn the mill. And when he did, several plates of food fell out. Picking them up, he proceeded home, stopping to offer the plates to a poor family who lived nearby. "At least you are thoughtful," said Fish when she heard his story. And on the appointed day she helped Basim erect a great tent in the center of the town, where everyone in the land was invited to feast. And while the locals thought the dishes seemed to lack Basim's usual flair, each guest ate as much as they wanted, and yet In the end, a considerable amount was left over. Fish sent carefully wrapped bundles of leftovers home with guests who promised to share the food with neighbors who had been unable to travel. Still, the Sultan did not like the idea of losing Fish to a simple cafe owner. On principle, he did not like to lose. And this time he ordered the young man to produce a mule from an egg. Again, Fish sent him to the spot where he had found her. This time, her mother brought forth 3 eggs, and on his way home, Basim dropped one. Out of the egg sprang a mule, which ran this way and that, and finally plunged into the sea and disappeared. When he told Fish about it, she laughed. "You ought to have been more careful," she admonished. "But at least you are honest." Basim took the 2 remaining eggs to where the Sultan was staying and tossed them up into the air. Out sprang the mules, and after they had chased the Sultan around the room several times, Basim, hiding a laugh, opened the door so that they could escape. From there they headed straight out to the sea, where they plunged into the water and disappeared. The Sultan was still determined to find an impossible task for the youth, and this time demanded that Basim bring him an infant not more than a day old that could walk and talk. Basim and Fish went together to the sea this time, and this time Fish's sister brought up her own child for them to take for the day, eager for a day to herself to relax after childbirth. "Auntie!" cried the infant, running up to Fish, though not more than a day old. And when Basim and Fish brought him before the Sultan, the baby stepped up to him, struck him in the face, and asked him, "How is it possible to build a palace of gold and diamonds in 40 days? For one man to feed all the people of the land? For a mule to be produced from an egg? To demand a woman be your wife without consulting her wishes?" And with each demand, the child struck a fresh blow, continuing to admonish the Sultan until he begged for mercy, telling Basim and Fish that they could take anything they wanted if they would only deliver him from the terrible infant. And so they left, taking only the baby, the coffee mill, and each other's hands. Now, if they married, or lived happily ever after, I cannot say. But I do know that somewhere in a little Mediterranean village, there's a little place called the Beautiful Fish Cafe, where good food and stories never run out. Folk tales and tall tales from all over the world are full of impossible tasks that are met with magical solutions. Would you like a cushion that can turn into a palace? A coffee mill that can produce plates of food on demand? An egg with a mule inside? What other magical items can you think of, from folklore or from your own imagination? I'd love to hear about them. Tell us about it in the comments below or post on Facebook or Instagram with hashtag MV Summer of Stories. In real life today, technology is its own form of magic, solving everyday problems with the push of a button or the click of a mouse. We connect with friends from across the world. We have cars that drive themselves. We even have ways to get specially prepared food to appear on our doorsteps without the aid of a magic coffee mill. To elaborate on the latter, I called on Frank Halling. Frank is a Pittsburgh-based ghost restaurateur who runs a tiny restaurant with a huge menu that does takeout and delivery with no sit-down, and also does ghost delivery via the apps DoorDash, Grubhub, Slice, Eat Street, and Uber Eats. With talents and experience as varied as his menu, Frank has been a project manager, soldier, computer consultant, and event planner, as well as chef.
Hi, Frank. Hey, greetings from outside my restaurant.
Hearing the term ghost kitchen, that sounds like kind of a spooky fairy tale unto itself. Can you tell us a little bit about what a ghost kitchen is and how to find out more about yours?
A ghost kitchen is you don't really know where the food comes from. Okay. The ideal ghost kitchen is a building that's a blank facade that people, DoorDashers, Grubhub, Uber Eats, come in and out in while somebody else makes your food. And that's the ideal ghost kitchen. So, this anonymous place makes your tacos, your pizza, your stir fry, and all of a sudden it's there, magically. I'm mostly web-based than anything else. pghghost1one.com. We're basically only open on the really heavy days of the week, which is basically Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday for dinner. And then I also vend food at music festivals and fairs. That picture that I sent you of me was when I catered a dance event, a belly dancing event.
I saw Hakan was in the photo.
Yeah, Hakan was in the. It was his event in Bloomfield, and that one was rough just simply because there were a couple people that were gluten-free, and that's something very real. And I've been doing vegetarian, vegan here and there. I'll be doing a vegan convention on the 24th.
In the story I just told, our main character travels all over the world to learn culinary arts. And I took a peek at your ghost kitchen menu, and I saw that your offerings are also inspired by cultures from really all over the world. Can you tell us a little bit about your inspiration for that?
Yeah, I've been cooking a little bit of everything for years upon years, from stir fry to good old Mexican tacos, which I learned how to do that in Phoenix, Arizona. I have a friend of mine that is a pierogi maker, John Kazor from Kazor Ravioli Company in Ford City, Pennsylvania. So he makes my dessert pierogies and my regular pierogies. And the dessert pierogies are pierogies stuffed with blueberries or apple filling. Fresh nachos, we throw them in the fryer and fry them up and then add all sorts of interesting toppings. We have something called the Polish taco, which is
perfect for Pittsburgh.
Yes, fried kielbasa and bacon, along with fried sauerkraut, and 2 pierogies thrown in just for extra decadence.
In the story, there's actually a magic coffee mill that when you turn it, plates of food come out. So it's a little bit like a ghost kitchen.
Yep, absolutely.
So if you had one of those, what kind of food would you have it make?
I would have to say Polish tacos, pierogi, halushki, the occasional fish sandwich, or as I like to say, fish sandwich. And yes, Italian ice.
Ooh, that would be nice today. It's really hot.
Oh, yes. I'm going to sweat my buns off.
Hey, well, thank you so much.
And I hope you have a wonderful day. And this was interesting. And you can get anything you want at Frank's Pittsburgh Ghost One Restaurant. Okay. I hope you have a wonderful day and enjoy.
You too.
And thank you for watching. If you enjoy the show, please like, share, or subscribe below. You can also help keep the stories coming by joining us at patreon.com/MV Story Dance. I'll see you next time for episode 5. In the meantime, you can catch missed episodes right here. And my phone opened DoorDash because I mentioned it. Magic!